The people that don't believe in the virus still at this point, right? Whether they just think they don't need to follow the rules everyone else are following because they don't believe in it. Because it's just like, the way I see it, like, every time I'd find myself in a church or any place of worship, I would kneel and put my hands together and repeat after the person speaking and do whatever everyone else around me was doing, even if I didn't believe in any of it. Like, shit, the things I've done for other people's beliefs weren't even like life or death.
Hey folks, how you doing? I just got a quick question about this whole COVID, not getting vaccinated and running to the fucking hospital once you get the virus fucking deal. Because this shit is out of fucking control, alright? And I'm gonna give you a quick story on why I think it's out of fucking control. Last week I had to bring my wife into the hospital. She has stage 4 breast cancer. She was dealing with some symptoms, and I had to bring her in to get some fluid drained. She was having some pain, blah, blah, blah. She was in there for 2 days. On the third day, she honestly should have stayed one more day. Maybe 2 more days, okay? But on the third day, instead of draining her fluid and what they wanted to do, they told us that she had to be discharged because they had no room left in the hospital because of COVID. Here's my question. Why 99% of everybody that's in the hospital with COVID right now is unvaccinated, okay? If you really fucking believe that COVID's not real, and you really believe that it's not a big deal, and you really believe that you don't need to get the vaccine, that is your fucking right, okay? I'm not gonna argue with you about that. What I am gonna argue with about is you running to the fucking hospital once you get the virus. If you don't trust the medical field to prevent you from getting it, why do you trust them to cure you from it? Why do you run to the fucking hospital? If you really believe that COVID's not a big deal and it's not this, that, the other, and you don't get the vaccine stick to your fucking guns and keep your motherfucking ass at home. Stop running to the hospital, putting everybody else at fucking risk, and in turn, the collateral damages. People like my wife who actually need medical fucking help for a chronic fucking disease get kicked out of the hospital because your dumb ass is too stupid to go get a fucking vaccine shot. Keep your ass at home. If you really believe COVID's not a big deal, prove it. Stick to your fucking guns, keep your ass at home, and fucking deal with it.
I'm done. I am done trying to convince you to think about anybody but yourself. A very close friend of mine told me about their friend today who has such a severe underlying health condition that when they went to the doctor and asked for the COVID vaccine, their doctor literally said to them, it might actually kill you. So they stayed home. They wore a mask. They did all of the right things. But because there was one dickhead in their sphere who thought that it came out too soon, that they don't trust what's in the vaccine, that they're covered in the blood so they don't need it, they got infected with the Delta variant and ended up in the ICU. While in the ICU, they texted my friend and they said, you know what, I probably should have just risked it because this is so horrible. Hours later, they died. They died today. So I am done. You have made it apparently clear that you don't care about the elderly, you don't care about the disabled, you don't care about the essential workers, and you don't care about children because you only care about yourself. The only people in your sphere that I give a shit about are the ones that you are infecting because you are so self-absorbed.
So I don't know if y'all have heard, but apparently a parent who knew for a fact that her and her child were COVID positive sent her kid to school and exposed more than 80 Nevada students.
In Germany, nearly 9,000 people have to be vaccinated again after a nurse swapped out vaccines for saline solution.
This story is shared with permission. One of my cancer patients got COVID a couple of months ago. Her husband, who is also a cancer patient, got COVID as well. He was hospitalized for weeks. She is still sick 2 months later. They were both fully vaccinated. They were exposed to the COVID-19 virus by a healthcare provider who doesn't believe in the vaccine. My cancer patient. This is not about healthcare providers that have some reason why they cannot take the vaccine. This is not about them. First of all, to spread false information about this virus and the vaccine as a medical provider, you should lose your license on the spot. Gone. Every healthcare worker who is eligible to receive the vaccine better get the freaking vaccine. I am so angry.
I'm about to describe a very typical respiratory COVID death to you. So on admission, these patients would usually come to the floor either on room air or on 2 liters or so of oxygen, which is a very low amount of oxygen. Right off the bat, you could get a sense for which patients were not going to do well. I really don't know how. I think it was just something our subconscious was picking up on, because I never could identify one single thing that made them look worse than the other ones. They usually said things like, I just really don't feel well. I can't really catch my breath. I'm just so tired. Throughout the day, they would begin to deteriorate. Their shortness of breath would increase. Their oxygen levels would start to plummet. We would have to slowly, sometimes quickly, turn their oxygen up. More times than I care to remember, patients were doing a complete decline within one 12-hour shift, but we'll say 24 hours in this case. So at some point during that 24 hours, the patient's going to decline to the point where they needed 15 liters at high-flow nasal cannula with 15 liters non-rebreathers sitting on top of it. At this point, we have asked family members to stop calling the patient so that they don't waste so much energy trying to speak when they can't. Reference guide for what lungs look like. You can see the COVID-19 lung down at the bottom. That's about where we'd be at with this patient. So on top of supplemental oxygen, they're probably also getting a steroid called Decadron through their IV, the antibiotics, remdesivir, Rocephin, Zithromax, and a host of vitamins. Eventually, the 15-liter combo is no longer working, so we are going to talk to the doctor, and he's probably going to order a BiPAP machine, which blows air into your face to help keep your oxygen levels up. You'll see people using these whenever they have sleep apnea. The patient will have to wear it for at least 4 hours on, and then they can take a break, usually to eat. But at some point, they are going to decline past that, and they will not be able to remove the BiPAP because their oxygen saturations will plummet immediately. They are no longer able to speak. Their entire effort is focused on just trying to catch their breath and breathe. Usually by this time in the game, we aren't encouraging them to get up. We've probably inserted a Foley catheter, or at least are forcing them to use a bedpan. We're rolling them for all of their movements. They're not allowed to get up and walk around. They can't. They physically cannot walk around. They are too weak, and their lungs can't handle it. Their oxygen tanks. This is where we call the family and inform them that the patient is very unlikely to recover if he doesn't get intubated soon, and they need to make the call. If the patient is still with us, obviously we're going to talk about that with them. Honestly, we've probably already discussed it long before then. If they decide intubation, they'll be sent to ICU if we have the beds. If not, they'd likely be intubated on the floor. And once intubated for COVID, your recovery rate is very unlikely.
At this point, the patient has become completely BiPAP dependent. They can't take it off to eat or drink or talk on the phone because they will immediately begin to desat, which means their oxygen will lower drastically. Keep in mind that these people, even while on the BiPAP, were satting only 90 or 91, which is very low considering you're having 100% oxygen pushed into your face. So now we would need the patient and the family to decide whether or not the patient was going to be intubated. If they decided to be intubated, they would hopefully be able to go to ICU, but if there were no ICU beds, it would just happen on the floor. I looked up the statistics last night. Post-intubated COVID patients, about 24% of them survived. That's roughly 2 out of 10 people. Once they were intubated, most of these people began to shut down. Their body systems would fail. They would need dialysis because their kidneys wouldn't work anymore. And when they got to that point, the chances of them surviving were virtually non-existent. If they chose not to be intubated, that left them with 2 other options. They could elect to go for a hospice or comfort care situation where we would load them up with the good drugs and they would eventually, hopefully, peacefully pass away. Or they could choose to continue doing BiPAP therapy and receiving all of the medications in an effort to make them better. Just like with intubation, some of them did end up surviving, which was always a huge win for the unit, but a lot of them didn't. Remember too that a lot of these patients died completely alone. We tried. It's probably one of my biggest regrets that I couldn't be in there with some of those people. But we had 5 to 7 other patients to take care of, and we couldn't allow visitors because of COVID, and the reality was that patients died alone. We tried really hard to make sure everybody got to at least FaceTime their family, and there were more than one case where we fought tooth and nail for the family to be allowed to come in and say goodbye. And then there was what COVID did to dementia patients. We would have patients come in the early stage of Alzheimer's. Maybe they didn't even know they had it yet. And, 3-4 days later, a week later, they couldn't recognize their family anymore. It progressed their dementia so much. A lot of those people died too. This wasn't a pretty death. This was people gasping for air. People ripping their BiPAP machines off, panicking, begging you to not let them die, but the BiPAP is the only thing keeping them alive. It was having one lady die only to move her husband out of ICU into that room after it was clean so he could die. These were awful deaths, and we saw more than one every single day.
Hey y'all, that ICU nurse here, and tonight we're going to talk about something serious, and it might be kind of hard for some of you to watch, but it is so important. For months, nurses and doctors have been screaming, if only we could get you guys in the hospital, let you see what was happening behind closed doors in the COVID units. Thanks to Wes LEMD and ICU doc at Vanderbilt, I have something I can show you. A patient of his thought it was so important that you guys see this that he allowed him to share it with the world. And before anyone in the comments tries to come and say I'm fear-mongering, I'm trying to educate you because everyone deserves to understand the reality of the situation and both sides of the argument. Here's the side that I know. I know that a lot of people like to talk about a 99% survival rate from COVID, but what they don't like to talk about is the people who survive their COVID infection in the ICU and the horrors that they have to go through to fight for their life. So when we talk about the effects of COVID, we don't just look at a mortality rate, and this is why.
Quickly, but on the backside of COVID is people who are left on a ventilator with a tracheostomy and a breathing tube, which takes them to long-term mechanical ventilation.
Okay, let's break that down. What you saw is a surgically implanted airway that goes into that man's trachea. He doesn't breathe through his mouth anymore. He breathes through a hole in his neck. He can't talk, and he can't even decide when he breathes. He has a machine telling him how fast to breathe, how deep to breathe, and how often to do it. Because unlike us, his lungs are still not strong enough after weeks on the ventilator in order to regulate that.
Will develop in the lungs so that a tube comes out of the chest and we have to drain fluid like this out of the chest, and this bubbling here.
Okay, let's break it down. What you saw there is called a chest tube. This often goes in the space called the pleural cavity. And we actually see this a lot after COVID. Due to the high peak pressure we have to put you on the ventilator in order to sustain your body's life. I wish I could say this was uncommon, but unfortunately I take care of people with maybe 3 of these at a time. Also, not comfortable.
In the bed, on the ventilator, to where their feet and legs lose their ability to have strength.
All right, think about it, people. You've been laying in a bed, paralyzed, most likely, and sedated in order for us to be able to keep your body alive for weeks at this point. Most people cannot move. We protect all of the bony surfaces to try and keep you from getting bed sores. And did you see that tube that looked like it had in it? Well, that's because it did. And that tube went up into his rectum. So don't come to me talking about a 99% mortality rate.
It's been a really, really trying week. I've run a lot of COVID patients to the hospital, and 100% of them were unvaccinated. Every last one of them. And when I asked them why they had not been vaccinated or what their reservation was, none of them could articulate why. None of them, when challenged, could say, here's why.
Last week, I tested positive for COVID. Started getting fever, all the other symptoms. Somewhere along the middle, started getting chest pain. Came to the ER, I'm positive for pneumonia. Ended up having to come back. I got admitted because my oxygen saturation levels aren't staying up. They've had to increase my oxygen. COVID is real. I'm gonna be here for a while. Get vaccinated. Whichever one you need. But it's real. get vaccinated.
I'm in Texas right now to bury my sister, who passed away of the COVID Delta variant last night. She couldn't get the vaccine because she had autoimmune disorders, but she could have been protected by other people getting vaccinated. And I know better than to try to appeal to them, because if they weren't selfish assholes, they would have done it already. But I will never forgive them. I will never forgive them for not protecting her. That is, other than losing her, that's the worst part of COVID. How do I not hate other people? How do I not hate other people forever?
So by now, we've all heard of the Delta variant of COVID that is starting to go around. I'm personally terrified, and I just wanted to share my experience with working with COVID patients over the last year. I saw so many deaths. I participated in so many codes. I saw so many people walk into the hospital and never leave. This isn't fear-mongering. This is things that I saw with my own eyes. Now, I made myself upset, but you know how many couples died next to each other in a room? Or how many people I had to wheel to ICU so they could say goodbye to their loved ones? How many phone calls I had to make? Hi, I'm so sorry to call you, but you really need to think about a DNR. Your loved one's probably not going to pull out of this. Every day was just code after code. There were so few people that we could save.
Over 95% of the people who were admitted to the hospital with COVID symptoms or who died from COVID last month, they weren't vaccinated. The Delta variant that is spreading through the unvaccinated population like wildfire is not only killing the very old, it's also killing the fairly young and healthy.
But in the end, it doesn't even matter.